for inviting me. This is actually a topic that I feel really strongly about, and I love talking about this. I will also say this is a topic that's bothered me for a long, long time. I mostly work with startups, and my office is in an incubator. That's my main business, is advising startups. And you know, startups are obviously all about innovation, and they either innovate, they either get some traction or they die. It's a pretty straightforward life. But bigger companies, not so much. Bigger companies often lose their mojo, and that really bothers me. Sometimes it bothers me just because I know a lot of the people and they're very good and I can see them frustrated, and sometimes it bothers me because I see they have as a company these amazing assets and advantages that they completely waste. So for whatever reason, I have to admit I'm a little conflicted, because if bigger companies were better at innovation, I wouldn't have much money investing in startups, right? Because it'd be a lot harder for startups, but it still bothers me. So what I wanted to do was talk, normally I give talks on how to really do a great job at continuous innovation, but for this conference, this group, I thought it might actually be more important to dive a little deeper into why it doesn't happen. Why it doesn't happen in so many companies. I will also sort of apologize in advance. I may have a whole box full of red cards, so be it. It's because I'm going to shine a light on areas that I think will probably feel uncomfortable. Obviously, I hope nobody takes it personally, but I really think this is probably 90% of the companies you work at. There is an insidious issue that really needs to get out on the table. So I want to try to take the opportunity to do that, and hopefully you'll find it useful. Just a little bit about me for those who don't know me. I started as a developer at HP Labs for 10 years writing software. It was a great place to learn. It was right near here, actually in Palo Alto. And I learned a lot. Obviously, one of the biggest lessons I learned was that having great engineers is not enough. That's probably the highest order thing I learned. And I think it's still the major lesson for so many people. It's not enough to have great engineering. You have to be able to do something useful with that team. And so I've always in my career after that been very interested in also how do you figure out what to build. So I did products. I'll tell you a little more about it because it ties into the theme of this talk in a minute. But I did products really in the platform and tools, infrastructure, plumbing space. And because of that, I got very lucky. And when Netscape started, many of you may know Netscape, actually we just had the 20-year reunion for Netscape, which is hard for me to realize and acknowledge, but it's been 20 years. It was an absolute blast seeing everybody, because many of them went off to all over this valley. I worked for Marc Andreessen as the head of platform and tools, and what was awesome about that is at HP, honestly, that was the PC era. So we did things the Microsoft way, essentially. But at Netscape, there was a whole new foundation, which was the internet. And I loved working on the platform technologies, things like JavaScript and plugins and SSL, the components that today we kind of take for granted, but at the time were emerging pretty much on a weekly basis. It was an amazing time for product. And anyway, after about 5 years or so, Netscape was acquired, and I joined the young eBay. I had a chance to get to know the co-founder through the developer program, which was part of the platform at Netscape, and Pierre Omijar, who was an amazing guy. And I had a chance to help build the product and also user experience organizations there. So I had been through several big, starting from small and growing to quite large companies. And after that, I just wanted to really work with startups. And I started Silicon Valley Product Group, and it's just a small number of us that have worked at large companies or been there, done that, and wanted to just help others. So that's what I do, and that's where a lot of my background comes from. I believe very strongly in product, user experience design, and engineering. And to me, they're the three legs of the stool. So I don't like to think of myself as any one of those. I work with teams, which is all of those. I think that gets to the theme of this conference as well. So to be clear, the job of the product organization, and just to be also clear, when I say product, I mean product management, user experience design, and engineering. I'm including all three of those. And if you want to talk engineering, I'm including development and test automation and site operations. I'm including all of that in engineering. So our job, though, as an organization together is to consistently add value to the business. I hope everybody agrees that that's why we're here as an organization. I love, Reed was the founding CEO of LinkedIn, and he's a brilliant guy, but I believe strongly in this point, that if you're not innovating, you're going to die. It's just about when, not if. Even though I have to say I have that argument with CEOs all the time. A lot of it boils down to they all say, well, we're investing in the future. And I'm like, where? What are you really doing for the future? All you're really doing is keeping your site up. That's what you're doing. You're keeping it running. You're doing little incremental optimizations. You're throwing a bunch of features onto the pile of more features that nobody uses. That's all you're doing. And so a lot of them have a hard time seeing that. And like I said, that's really bothered me for a long time. And what I wanted to talk about here is, why is that so rare in established companies? Now, I want to be right up front, this is not impossible at established companies. We all know awesome. I'm lucky enough to have been worked with several, like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix. These companies, Apple, obviously, these companies have consistently proven the ability to do significant disruptive innovation multiple times. So it is not impossible for an established company to do this. But that said, very few of them do. Many of them don't. And there are lots of reasons why not. And I want to kind of get the basic ones out of the way. I'm on record of complaining about this, because I see this one a lot personally, where I work with mostly startups, and occasionally things go really well, and the founding CEO calls in rich, right? They call in and say, I'm done, I'm gonna go do another one, or I'm gonna go to a beach somewhere. And then you have a team that's basically rudderless. Especially in those companies where the founding CEO is very passionate, very strong opinion. Look, they know every customer interaction. They probably talk to more customers than everybody else combined. They understand all the intricacies of the technology. They understand all of the capabilities and limitations of your product, your competitor. And what they've really been doing is hiring an organization to deliver those things. And now the leader leaves, and then there's this vacuum. There's this vacuum, and the team is like, what do we do? Well, we know how to optimize. We can continue, using Optimizely and constantly, tweaking this, sure. But as far as, it's sort of the beginning of the end in so many cases. Anyway, that's not, some brilliant observation. Lots of people have seen that. Two other people that I think have really contributed in a deep way to this thinking about why big companies don't innovate. One is Ben Horowitz, who I was lucky enough to work with at Netscape. He was also worked for Marc, and he was probably the best product person I'd ever met. He went on to become one of the best CEOs I've ever met, and is now completely disrupting venture capital along with Marc Andreessen. But anyway, Ben, he makes lots of points about this. He's very passionate about the topic as well. But one of the analogies he uses that really resonates with me is he likes to talk about peacetime companies and wartime companies. I should give a plug. His book is amazing. It's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It's a new book. If you haven't read that book, I literally can't make a better recommendation to you than read that book. It is Amazing book. So anyway, he likes to talk about the difference between peacetime and wartime. And his point there is that so many of these companies they've already got some traction in a product, they're kind of on that product cycle, and then, the founders leave, and then professional CEOs come in, and they do their thing. And his point is they're really trained to maximize an existing cycle. And there's always been this debate in our industry about MBA, good or bad. And what's really going on, in my opinion, is MBAs are trained in this, taking existing product and maximizing, capturing as much value as possible. They're typically not trained in how to create new products. They're not trained in what's really at the heart of innovation. And so that causes a lot of grief in this valley because we're all about innovation. Now, I want to be careful, and I'll make this point in the next slide, but there's definitely real challenges and need for scale and execution. We'll get to that. But Ben's observation, and I think it's a deep one, is there's a different mindset for wartime versus peacetime. And where I'd take his point even to the next step is, I think peacetime is a thing of the past. For our kind of companies, technology companies, it's really hard to find that 10-year product cycle like we used to be able to get. Maybe 10 months for a lot of us. And I have to admit, product people are normally pretty paranoid, and I'm one of those. I'm always thinking there's another competitor out there that's ready to eat our lunch. And sometimes I'm right about that, and sometimes wrong, but you always fear that. And Ben's point is you can't be a peacetime leader. You can't treat your company like peacetime where, everything's fine. It goes away. And by the time you realize it, honestly, it's probably too late. So I think that's one important point. The other guy that's really thought a lot about this topic, and I think has a lot of good things to say, is Steve Blank. Many of you may know him from the customer development world. He's author of 4 Steps to the Epiphany, and a very good thinker about product in general. And a lot of people characterize, startup as this entity that's in search of a business, basically. It's trying to get some traction. But then an established company is all about scale and execution. And that is sort of the maybe tagline for a lot of people. While I agree with the characterization of a startup, I don't agree with the characterization of an established company. Because while established companies do have to scale, that's today's work, but it's not tomorrow's work. We have to be great at both innovation and scale. So, this quote really spoke to me because I think it's true. A lot of companies put these processes in place which are all about scale, all about repeating to kind of grow their business, and not even thinking of the damage that can do to innovation. Probably I almost don't want to say this because I don't want to get started down this path. One of my hot buttons is tech companies that embrace Six Sigma. I don't know a single example that's not horrific, just horrible. And of course, it comes from a good place. They're trying to improve their manufacturing, and then some clueless senior leader says, well, we can do that in engineering, and we can do that in product. And of course, they literally kill their companies. So that's maybe an extreme form. But you don't have to have some black belt running around your company causing damage in order to have this problem. Okay, so anyway, what I'm wondering though, so I think all 3 of those are real issues, and I'm not discounting them in the least. However, I've always had this sneaking suspicion that there's an even bigger problem going on than all of those. And that's what I, have been thinking about this for many years. I'll actually tell you the first seeds that were planted, and many of you may be able to relate to this. So when I was a developer at HP, I was doing technology products. Back then, it wasn't called customer development, but we were doing customer development techniques. It's what was taught to me, is this is how you really do product. And our customers at the time, I mean, if you think back then to like, this is the PC client server era, you know who bought technology products, right? It was the IT organizations in big companies. So our customers were these IT organizations. And I would go to them and we would sell them, you know, we sold them all kinds of development tools, runtime systems, all kinds of things for them to build applications. And the first thing that struck me, I mean, it was always, and I don't want to leave the wrong impression, there's nothing like visiting your customers. I was hooked on that, and I still constantly do it. It's how we really learn. But I was struck because I was selling, I wasn't a salesperson, I was the engineer going along, but we were selling to development teams. So I figured, like, how different from us can they be? Turns out a lot. They can be very different from us. These teams, well, the whole nature of the team was completely different. How they worked, how they thought. One of the things that I observed was that they were buying our technology in order to build a purpose-built application for their own company. Okay, they were buying technology or using technology in order to help run their business. We were building technology because that was our business. Now, I just observed that early on. And I have to admit, I was like, boy, they have weak developers, and I can't believe they have no process, they have they were doing everything old style waterfall and big bang releases, and it's almost like there wasn't even anybody for me to talk to about these topics there, you know what I mean? It was just a completely different world. But they did need the technology, and they were great customers, and they loved the products. That wasn't the issue. But I observed this, and I just kind of put it away in my head. And then over time, I realized, man, I'd much rather work with the people in companies that are actually responsible for their actual products and services, not the people that are taking care of the internal employees. And it was just an observation. What changed was the internet. Honestly, the internet changed, if you haven't heard that before, the internet did change everything. It really did. And because now, I mean, those companies were whining about technology efforts forever. They've always whined about technology efforts, how much money is wasted, how slow it goes, but frankly, this was internal IT. It was a nuisance. It wasn't much more than that. It was a nuisance. And sometimes they would go hire Accenture to help out. You know, they'd do something, but it was just a nuisance. But all of a sudden, with the internet, these companies actually had to provide their services to their customers. They had to now use technology not just to help their own employees, but to directly serve their business. And that really did throw a wrench into everything. Now it moved, these issues that I had observed for years moved from being a nuisance to a business continuity issue. And that's really what I found, is that the legacy of that has not gone away. In fact, in a lot of places, it's propagated. And I call this the IT mindset. The IT mindset. Now, what I'm referring to here with IT, because you still hear that term a lot, it's one of those keywords. When they say IT, a lot of people just mean it loosely as, oh, this is engineering. But I am trying to draw a real distinction, because engineers in support of, well, I call it true IT. These are the people that do things like your SAP upgrade. You know, that's not what we do in this room. I mean, you might have to do some of that, maybe, but that's not why we're here. We're here to build the products and services that power your customer experience. In many cases, are your customer experience. So that's the difference between helping to run your business and being your business. So I call it IT mindset. To be honest, another keyword to watch for, a lot of people when they say it's enterprise, it's for the enterprise. A long time ago, enterprise meant big scale. Today, enterprise means IT, okay? So it's not a good thing when somebody tells you it's for the enterprise. It's a bad thing, all right? So what I wanted to talk about, though, was this mindset. Now, a lot of this mindset, in fact, I'd say most of the time the company predates the internet. When it's in this, a very established company, it's been around 20 years or so, this is all over. Because when they created that business, it was probably a brick and mortar business, an airline or a bank or something like that. And they had technology as sort of a necessary evil in order to, run some of their operations. Now, of course, technology plays a very different role, which is what I wanted to talk about. But that mindset lives on. And one of the places that I see this propagated is, so what happens? A company gets a little success, a little money, so now they can go attract some big name executive. So what do? They hire somebody from Walmart or Home Depot or from, some big brand that's a big company that is probably, almost certainly in that IT mindset. And so they bring that with them. The new CFO, the new head of marketing, they bring this mindset with them. And of course, they expect things to work a certain way. So I see this disease spreading. And I'm arguing that this is one of, if not the most insidious reason for the lack of true innovation. So what I wanted to spend a few minutes doing is highlight sort of the 10 things I look for and see. They kind of smack you in the face is what happens when I visit these companies. You can't miss them really, but what I want to do is put a name on it, help you connect the dots, because my worry is that these signs are at your company. And if they are at your company, I think if you want to fix this, you've got to call it out. You've got to get it out on the table and deal with it. I actually think all of these are fixable. I also have written several articles on how we do introduce real product mojo into an old company. We can absolutely do it, but it's this mindset that's the sticky, stubborn part. So it starts with purpose. And I mean that at its most basic level. I already alluded to this, but this is the most basic point, which is, why is this technology and product organization even here? Mary was actually, I want to give her credit, because this is, we were talking beforehand, and we both see the same problems. And she was, her hot button whenever she hears people refer to the business. And I'm only mentioning it because I was going to mention it anyway. That's what we're talking about here. There are so many companies who think the reason you were hired is to serve the business. If you hear that, you have this problem. So in an IT organization, in an IT mindset, yeah, you're kind of there to serve the business. In a product organization, you're there to serve the customers. The actual real customers, not the HR manager. That's not a customer. That's a coworker. That's not your customer. So you're there to serve the customer within the constraints of the business. So we can't ignore the business. I mean, you might be able to ignore HR. Many of us do. But I'm talking about, you can't ignore finance. I mean, they're going to have to pay for a lot of this. You can't ignore marketing. They care about and are supposed to protect the brand. You can't ignore legal. They're supposed to protect, make sure you stay on the right side of the law. Biz dev, they might have partnerships. There are real constraints represented by the business. The difference is, in an IT organization, we build what the business tells us to. In a product organization, we build what customers need us to build to be successful within the constraints of the business. And honestly, I mean, that may sound minor, I don't know, but it's not. It is like everything I'm going to talk about stems from that. Very different world. Frankly, well, I'm going to talk about, so let me, so that's the first one. The very existence of your organization. Why is it at the company? The second one is passion, frankly. I love the John Doerr quote. For those that don't know, he's one of our Valley's most famous venture capitalists. He was the original one behind Netscape and quite a guy. And he likes to explain, look, we need a team of missionaries, not a team of mercenaries. And this is true. In an IT organization, they're all mercenaries. Everybody. The engineers are mercenaries. They'll basically build whatever. They could care less. They probably think it's a stupid idea, just like everything else they've been asked to build. And by the way, they're almost certainly right. It's not that. But it's like it's not their job, you know. Somebody else figures that out. It's some executive somewhere says we want X, and so you build X. And so there's just there's clearly no passion. In contrast, in a product organization, we join the organization because we're committed to, we're really attracted to and get committed to that vision and that passion for that vision, because we really want to help these kinds of customers. We really want to work on this problem. It's a very different mindset. It took me a while to put my finger on it, but one of the things I really noticed as an HP developer going out to these IT customers is we loved what we were doing. I know I did. I know a lot of the developers on my team very well still. We loved it. We were all over this. But the teams we were meeting with were like, they had lobotomies or something. They were just there, just doing whatever. And that is a very distinct difference. I mean, you feel a little sorry for them, but you know, they're there working on yet another ERP upgrade. You know, how exciting is that? So, but that's a big point, passion. And this is, you can easily spot the symptom of lack of passion and containing it, but it is, it's our jobs, especially as the leaders, to inspire the organization. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Another very big and profound difference in a product organization versus a true IT or IT mindset organization, this whole notion of requirements, which for those that don't know me, I really hate that word. I really don't like it. In fact, if you think your job for your team, or if you're a product manager, product owner, if you think your job is to gather requirements and document them in a user story for the engineers, that's IT mindset. That is not your job. We actually, in my world, we refer to that as the antithesis of product. So it's the exact polar opposite. So, now, there's a lot of reasons why, and I could talk for an hour about the evils of roadmaps and why that causes so many problems. But the fundamental issue here is if you're just there in like an IT mindset to build what somebody tells you to build, then yeah, somebody says you got to do this, you just do it. If you're in a product organization, you could build what people tell you, but if it doesn't actually work and succeed for the business, we fail. We get no credit for that. So our job is actually to come up with solutions that really work. So in fact, one way to think of it, our job is to actually discover the requirements, not gather the requirements. And even more generally, there's a couple very general topics. First of all, it's not, try to break your mind of any of the remnants that horrible waterfall processes poison the well for so many people. But a lot of people think, well, the market drives the product requirements and the product requirements drive the technology. That's complete bullshit. It's not how it works. The technology enables the solution at least as much as the business needs driving the solution. The design direction drives the solution at least as much as the other way around. We are completely intertwined. So that's one whole notion, is this sort of fallacy about where things come from. Yeah. Anyway, So requirements, well, maybe the other thing I'll talk about is, I call it the 2 inconvenient truths about product. The first inconvenient truth is at least half of the things we think are requirements are not. Now, even more than that, even a stronger statement about that, at least half of the ideas we have to solve the problem won't solve the problem. At least half. At least half of the things that are littering your product roadmaps right now, I guarantee you are not going to work. When I say not going to work, the number one reason is that we're all excited about this, and then we put it live, and our customers are not excited about it. That's by far the most common. There's lots of reasons that can be the case. And then, but for whatever reason, they don't use it. We can see it in the analytics. They don't use it. So that's clearly a failure. Second, sometimes they want to use it. They even try to use it. And then they say, life is too short. This is so complicated. I can't figure out how to use it. And so they don't use it. That's another common reason. And sometimes when we really get into it, we realize this is way more complicated than we thought, and we kill it ourselves. But for whatever reason, at least half of our product ideas are never going to work with customers. The other inconvenient truth that drives a lot of this need for discovery, the other inconvenient truth is even the ones that could work with customers, the ones that really are potentially good ideas, it takes several iterations before it works well enough that it does what it needs to do. Like in our world, in an IT mindset, it's sort of time to market. You hear all the stuff about you have to hit this date and certain quality and certain. It's completely useless to us. In our world, it's time to money. In other words, when does it actually work well enough for our company that it does the job it needed to do? That's all that matters. Now, that's usually 3, 4, 5 iterations. The reason I'm so passionate about things like continuous deployment and continuous delivery, I know many of you are, is because this is one of the big tools in our tool bag to do that, to do it faster. If an iteration takes us 4 months, and that may sound ludicrous, but there are lots of established companies that are literally 4 to 6 months for iteration. I work with teams that are 10 to 15 iterations per week. Okay, so, we're not even talking the same language there. So that is, those 2 inconvenient truths about product, at least half the ideas aren't going to work with customers and the other half are going to take many iterations, means just throw out the window this old notion of requirements. It is not helping us. We need to discover what the product really needs to do. Okay. The next one is probably the most sensitive one to talk about. And whenever I talk about this with companies, it's always, I feel a little bad about it, but I can't not talk about it. It's too profound. In IT mindset companies, the capabilities of the people in the roles is completely different. I mean, even some of the very roles. I'm going to come back to the role of product manager in a minute. That's a huge issue. User experience designers. In IT companies, IT mindset, they might have a few people that they give that title to, but it's rare. Because frankly, the company doesn't care about it. They don't care about it. They don't understand it. They just don't. It's lip service. Project managers. They usually have all these old school project managers that are exactly the wrong kind of people for what we need. They're all about policing the process and taskmaster, and this is not what we need. So you find that as a symptom in IT mindset. The old business analyst, do you guys remember that job? That is from the old days of waterfall and big thick manuals or documentation specs. Hopefully none of you have that role anymore, but sadly I bet some of you do. And it's just a sign. It's a sign of that IT legacy. Honestly, a lot of the developers in an IT mindset organization, they have no awareness of scale issues, performance issues. To be honest, most of them couldn't even tell you what continuous deployment is. It is a completely different caliber there. The one that really, those are all serious issues, honestly. Every one of those is a serious limitation for a team. But the one that really is, I think, a fatal blow is the product manager. Because in truth, In an IT mindset organization, the product managers are typically very weak. Now, in their defense, usually they were something else, and they were just sort of anointed product manager because they read that they need this person. Agile says they need a product owner. It sounds close enough. Let's just give you that title. They're usually maybe a QA person or a project manager, or they're usually a project manager. That's probably the genesis for most of them. They come because in an IT organization, they didn't have product people. They didn't have UX people either, typically. They just basically have project managers that gather up and document requirements for other developers. So that is, companies think that's the closest thing. And so they really take these very junior people that are not at all equipped for the job, and they put them in this role. And in a product company, well, hopefully you guys all get this, teams are only as good as their product owner. Don't get me wrong. Without strong engineering, without strong design, you don't have a good product. But I would argue that is not enough. They're only as good as their product owner. And taking usually the weakest person on the team and making them the product owner is a huge mistake. So in an IT mindset, they're usually these very weak people. In a true product company, they're usually the strongest people in the company. And that is a huge disconnect, huge disconnect. And if it's one of the easiest ways for me to tell how the company views this role. You need rock stars for this role. I mean, I don't want to set it up like it's impossible. There are lots of people usually in a company that have the horsepower to do this role, but you need to put those people in this role, and you need to equip them to succeed. You need to give them the environment they need to succeed. But the staffing itself is a huge difference and huge issue. Another issue is funding, how the company thinks about funding and staffing. And you've all seen it before. Some CFO is kind of like the man in charge for these things, and they'll say things like, I want to see a ROI or a business case for this particular project. So they staff and fund projects rather than teams. That's a common problem. That's a whole other discussion about all the bad things that happen in an organization, mostly because the rest of the organization has to do all kinds of creative workarounds to get around the silliness of how things are funded. The same thing happens in Washington, D.C. It's the same kind of silliness, but there's no excuse for it in our world. Process, of course, in IT mindset organizations, it's so much about control. It's about, frankly, almost all of them today will tell you they're agile. You guys know enough to know most of them are not agile, right? It's a little bit in the tail end. They do, for the build stage of waterfall, they break it into a few sprints, and then they have a hardening sprint at the end, which is the euphemism, right, for QA, and then they call that agile. And in fairness, I don't blame the engineers for that. They at least are trying to do what they can in their world, but that's like a little agile, giant waterfall. It's the bigger issues around how the company manages process and thinks about it. Okay. One of the consequences of IT mindset, most people focus in on the politics, and the politics are rough. However, what's really, a lot of that is caused because they're all set up in silos. People don't think of themselves as a product team working on search. They think of themselves as a developer or a product manager or a designer, and they live in their little, or they work with the business side, or they work on the marketing side. They don't think of themselves as a team. And that creates, just all kinds of bad things. And big differences in IT mindset organizations, we optimize or organize around function, but in a product organization, we optimize and organize around teams. Which sort of leads to one other point about organization, which is in an IT mindset, well, first of all, the developers are usually buried under a CIO. So if any of you in this room work for a CIO, it's a sign of this problem. The CIO is who runs true IT. The CIO they're the ones that actually should hire Accenture for stuff like that. That's a totally different world. The engineers in a product organization work for a CTO. The difference is, again, internal versus your actual business. I don't honestly care about the org chart, to be truthful. I could care less. It doesn't really mean that much. What matters, though, is a sign of how they think about it. That's what is issue. Just like if there is a product organization, it's often buried in marketing in an IT organization, as opposed to product is usually a top level. It's product, it's technology, it's marketing. Those are the three top level organizations. All right. Accountability is another one of those. To be honest, in an IT mindset organization, it's a farce. Accountability is a farce. You can't hold a team accountable for the results if the team didn't actually have any say in what they build, when it was due, what's inside it, how it's designed, none of that. They just are there to implement in an IT organization. That's how they view it. That's really how they're set up, it's how the rest of the company views it. So you can't hold them accountable. Once in a while, I see a CFO or a CEO try to hold the stakeholder who requested the silly project accountable, but then they immediately, you all know what happens. Then they immediately say things like, well, they ended up going so slow, it had to be cut in half, there was none of the functionality I asked for, and then it did a really crappy job, and so it's not our fault, it's the technology team's fault. And so you get that blame thing going on. Accountability is ridiculous in an IT mindset. In a product organization, it's all about the results. We don't get, I like to say in a good team, in a bad team, we celebrate a release. In a good team, we celebrate a meaningful milestone of a KPI, for example, of some result. And that's one of the things I love about continuous deployment. It puts releases the way we ought to think about them. Just another daily activity. The release is not the big deal. It's whether or not it contains anything useful that means something. All right. And then the last point here is leadership. And it often does boil down to leadership. I love this quote from Bill Campbell. For those that don't know, Bill Campbell, he's the guy behind the scenes at many of the best company in our industry, including he was a coach to Steve Jobs for 20 years and Larry and Sergey at Google. The guy's amazing and one of the best product guys I've ever met. And anyway, he's right here that the team, the company cares about what the leaders care about. And in an IT organization, the leaders view technology, honestly, as this necessary evil. They view it as, and in fact, in many cases, they're downright scared of technology. I understand it represents change, it represents risk to their business. They get freaked out. They constantly overreact to competitors. There's all kinds of problems that happen when they view technology this way. But in a true technology-powered product organization, we're inspired by the technology. These are huge opportunities. This is our chance that we've been waiting for. We view, in a technology company, we view technology as an advantage, not an evil. It's a very different mindset that starts it at the top. And you look at people like Jeff Bezos, who runs Amazon, or it's too easy to point to Zuckerberg at Facebook. He is an engineer, but like Bezos was an investment banker. Jobs was a marketing mind. These were, they don't have to be developers, but they have to be passionate about product. They have to understand that's what the company's about, is our products. And they have to embrace technology. Rather than be scared of it, they have to really leverage it and embrace it. And so that's what we have to do, and that's what we have to have our leaders do. So those are probably the 10 most important things that are clues to me that the company is acting as an IT mindset company. And at least with the companies, it's usually I'm brought into these companies because a friend joins as the head of product or something, and they're trying to help bring some sanity. And so this is the kind of change that you need to do. It's a hard problem. I don't really know how to solve that. What I do is I try to shine a light on the behaviors and connect the dots, because invariably at every one of these companies that have the behaviors I described, the results suck. I mean, they hate. They say, we haven't innovated in 20 years. You hear stuff like that all the time. They also say, and it takes forever to go from concept to launch. They're so frustrated. My job is to say, okay, you're right, but you need to understand this is why. This is why. And it's your fault, but this is why. And we talk about that kind of change. Until you get it out on the table and you name it, I don't know how to change it. Anyway, I hope you think that was useful. I include my email right there, and the stuff in the book. There's a big website, lots of articles, a lot more that's in the book, and I encourage you to do it. Thanks very much.